was reading through your very hectic past about all you have achieved in your time. My favorite description I found was LGBTQ iconoclast, activist, and disruptor. I love the disruptor part, and I hope you're very proud of it.
Oh, I am extremely proud. We were disrupted before the word became popular.
So you are en route to the province town, and we hope not to disrupt, but to take part in a discussion during our second only Pride Week about being at Stonewall. Will you take us through that night for you?
Well, when I was 18 years old, like anybody else my age at 18, uh, you didn't know very much about gay people. The only thing I knew growing up in Philadelphia that there were no homosexuals in Philadelphia,
Hmm.
and that my people were in New York in this place called Greenwich Village. So as soon as I graduated high school, I hightailed it to New York. And you didn't know where to go. So you knew that all the beatniks and the hippies supposedly lived in this place called Greenwich Village. So I think, well, they think our people are kind of strange, so maybe they're there. And so I went down there and walked around, and lo and behold, I found Christopher Street. And made me very happy. So I had moved to New York 6 weeks before Stonewall, and I started hanging out on Christopher Street every single night. And if you were 18, that was what you did. And you would walk along Christopher Street, and you'd meet your friends, and you might go for a cup of coffee at the Silver Dollar restaurant, and then you would go up to Stonewall, and that was your night. Every night. You might stop into a few other places in the village.
Hmm.
I had discovered that there was a place called, or an organization called Mattachine. And so one afternoon I went to Mattachine and walked in the office, and they kindly asked me to leave. It seems that I was only 18, and they wouldn't let anyone in their office unless they were 21 because they were afraid of being raided for corrupting the morals of a minor. Which, by the way, was a really good thing because on
Yeah.
the way out, I met Marty Robinson, and he said, we're creating something new. And he said, I've started something called the Action Group, and why don't you join? And I did. And we had a couple of meetings, and it really didn't go very far, with the exception of one thing on the night of Stonewall. At 18 years old, I was in Stonewall. I looked like the boy next door because I'd only been to New York for 6 weeks. I had short hair. I was absolutely adorable. Um,
So
um,
we gather from this you weren't one of the drag queens that night.
no, but I was one of the street kids.
Hmm.
I was living at the YMCA, had no job, little money, and very little prospects,
Hmm.
which is why I go into the myths of Stonewall, and from a pragmatic point, can show you where the differences are and where the myths are,
Hmm.
and how we can dispel some of them.
So I interrupt you. Let's go back to that night then.
So late in that evening, I went into the Stonewall, and I was just standing at the bar, and all of a sudden the lights blinked. Then they came on full force, and I looked at a friend next to me, and I said, "What's going on?" They said very nonchalantly, "It's just a raid." Well, they might have been nonchalant, but I'd never been in a raid before, so I was a little nervous. Police came barging in, and I do mean barging. They pushed around drag queens and butch dykes and anybody who was in drag. And then they would go over to the people who looked successful, tell them to take their wallet out, and take money from them in plain view of everybody. That's what they thought they could do to us.
Hmm.
And then finally, they started carding people. Well, looking like the kid next door, they couldn't care about me at all. So I was one of the first to be carded. And I went outside and stood across the street. And as people started getting let out, all of a sudden we started forming a semicircle around the door. And pretty soon there were more of us outside than there were inside.
Hmm.
Inside were only the police and the bar employees. So at that point, one of the policemen came out because they had done their bit. They gotten all the money, and they wanted to go back to the station. And they said, open the door, said a few mean things, and then said, disperse. We didn't. A little while passed, and they came out again and said, disperse. And we didn't. This time a few nasty things were said back and forth. And then after the door closed, we started picking up anything that was around us. Cans, little stones, and throwing them at the bar. They tried one more time to get us to disperse, but they could hardly open the door because we were throwing so many things at them.
Hmm.
Uh, there's an interesting point here, which I love in the Stonewall
Mhm.
timeline, which is it took an hour for reinforcements to come, and I think I understand the reason for that. Number one, for the first time in history, gay people had imprisoned police. They were our prisoners. They were stuck in that bar. So, how do you think it felt for one of those police officers to call the station house and say to his other people, "Help! I'm being entrapped by faggots and dykes. They won't let me leave."
But you were arrested that night.
No, I was not
All
arrested.
right.
I'm across the street and watching most of the scene, sometimes getting involved. Then Marty Robinson, the person that created the vacuum, came
Mm-hmm.
up to me, and he had a piece of chalk. And he said, right on the street and the walls of Christopher Street, tomorrow night, Stonewall. So I'm one of the people who did that. And I was going up and down the street doing that. What's interesting about that aspect is I keep saying constantly, nobody was there throughout all the hours that it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
People were coming and going. People were standing on corners and craning their necks. Other people were passerbys. So there's 1,000 people who say I was there that night. Excuse me, tens of thousands. So I make a distinction between those who were there and those who were participants.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what I think is very important about that is that the participants are the ones who became Gay Liberation Front.
Mm-hmm.
So we're the ones who were riding up and down the street that night.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones who spoke from the closed Stonewall the second night
Mm-hmm.
from the front doors, Marty Robinson and Martha Shelley. Third night, we were already out leafleting. Fourth night, GLF was organized, and within 3 weeks, we held our first demonstration.
That was part of you called yourself the Christopher Street Liberation Day. 3 weeks
That's
later.
1 year later.
All right. So this you were involved with the very first gay pride, which was 69 or 1970? 69?
1970. So
1970 was the very first one.
yes.
So
So
these are quite tame now for you these days.
yes, they're very tame.
But
So, to me, the magic and spirit of Stonewall went on for a full year.
Mhm.
And then in 1970, on the first anniversary of Stonewall, is when we had Christopher Street Liberation Day
Mhm.
Committee, which formed the first gay pride. And my Marshall's badge and my donation can have recently been donated to the Smithsonian.
Yeah, I saw that. You had a lot of our guys there. But then when you became notorious for
Me?
zapping
No,
national
look how friendly I am. I'm not notorious.
for zapping national TV shows like Poor Walter Cronkite. Were they successful in getting the message across, you think?
Oh my God, yes. So, what I learned from Stonewall and GLF primarily was that if we were going to be out loud in your face, the reason for doing that was, and GLF did that very well, we were taking back our identity. We were no longer going to allow society to label us as they wished, which was child molesters, mentally
Mm-hmm.
ill, illegals. No, none of that anymore. Sorry. We're not, take that word homosexual, put it up on the shelf there somewhere. I'm a gay man. That's
Mm-hmm.
self-identity. So that was one thing we did, which was very important. But I realized our purpose was to make society realize who we were. We would never
Mm-hmm.
have true liberation or true rights or true equality unless they realized that we were their kids, their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, their aunts, their cousins. They already knew us, but yet they didn't know us. And it was important for them to get to know us. And the best way for them to get to know us is media. And we were censored on media.
Mm-hmm.
So when I put all this together, I figured, okay, if media's not going to meet with us, if they're not going to show us, we're going to force their hand. And that's when I started disrupting TV shows. First was the Mike Douglas Show, then the Today Show with Barbara Walters, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and the last one, which was the big one, which was the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And that's, a story that everybody loves to hear because the CBS network went blank for 7 minutes. And Walter was the most trusted man in television. And in those days, there was only CBS, NBC, and ABC, and 66 million people saw that.
And then years later, You went from being disruptor to be part of the establishment when they invited you to become a member of the Comcast and NBC's external joint diversity advisory council. So you switched to the other side. They didn't remember you from the past then, obviously.
Well, the funny thing about that is Comcast Joint Diversity Council is under the board of directors of Comcast. And when I got the call, asked me to serve and be LGBT liaison, I turned it down. And the person that called me is a good friend by the name of David Al Cohen. He's the senior executive vice president, right under the president at Comcast. And I said, I just don't have time because in my life, I go from one thing to the next thing and I don't look back. And David said to me, which is the first time that I'd ever heard this, Mark, you don't understand. This is historic. And I said, why? And he said, you were the first one to disrupt national media. And now we're giving you the opportunity to consult and tell media how to depict your community. And so I said, it won't just be a rubber stamp. And he said, I guarantee it won't be a rubber stamp. I said, okay. And just a couple weeks later after that, I found myself at 30 Rock, NBC headquarters, in a conference room with the president of NBC, president of NBC News, the producer of the evening news, the Today Show, MSNBC, all their program producers. And I'm sitting at a table, and they introduced me, and I didn't know what to say. So the first thing out of my mouth was, it's good to be back here at 30 Rock. You took me out of here 40 years ago in handcuffs.
We're rushing through because you have a lot here. But we want to talk about the fact you founded the influential Philadelphia Gay News. So did that mean you started combining radicalism with business?
Yes, absolutely. I think I went into the news business with the same fervor that I've always had and passion with anything I go into. And I want our community to always believe or strive to be number one and the most professional. And so the obstacle I had at that point, where when you said, oh, I'm going to create a gay newspaper, people thought, oh, it's going to be full of sex ads. And sex stories or what have you. So in the first issue, our first cover boy was a 40-something-year-old health commissioner in the state of Pennsylvania, the first cabinet level position in the nation to come out. Our second cover boy was the governor of Pennsylvania. Our objective was to show people this is a real newspaper, that our community needs to have real news about what's going on so that we could debate and communicate with each other.
So, Mark, you went on to be the president of both the National LGBT Press Association and the National Gay Newspaper Guild. So you must be in a good position to comment about the health of LGBT media. Is it doing as well as bad as mainstream media these days in this digital age?
It's a good question. I think all media is going through a change due to the internet, obviously. Mainstream media is taking a bigger hit than LGBT media, simply because we're a niche market that advertising agencies and companies are just beginning to realize has that little green stuff called money, and they want it. I'll give you an example. I was outside of Stonewall filming something for BBC a couple of weeks ago, and outside on my left-hand side was Cadillac filming a TV commercial for Pride Week, and another Cadillac group doing print ads for Cadillac. And on my right-hand side was Calvin Klein doing ads for Gay Pride Week. We could have never expected something like that years ago. I mean, those things are just beginning to happen. But I got to ask you, when you watch Fox News, look at the ads they have there. Why aren't those companies in LGBT media? So that's a continued fight that we have. And we're going to continue to have it. We might get a little loud about it.
So let's get back to reason for your visit to PTown to talk about Stonewall. Do you think in this 50th year, we as a community give it the respect it deserves?
It depends on where in the world you're talking about. So pride, gay pride, is different things in different countries. In America, for the most part, it's become a celebratory thing. In other countries, it is what it was originally, a protest march. In places like Istanbul, they're told they can't march, yet they come out and march anyway, which is what we did the first year. we told the police department we were marching no matter if we had a permit or not, and we did. Um, so that's the protest. I think the complaints by some people are twofold. Number one, it's become too commercial. And number two, it's lost its roots of activism. But on that second point, I think we're coming back to it thanks to having an administration in Washington that's trying to tear apart and roll back all the rights that we've worked over the last 50 years to get. So that activism is coming back. I think there's a need for corporate support for one very simple reason. When you had just a few thousand, like we had that first year, we couldn't get any corporations to sponsor us. Craig Rodwell, who ran the organization, if he could have got a corporation to sponsor us, I'm sure he would have taken it. He was a capitalist. He owned the Oscar Wilde bookstore. If you're having 3 million, 2 million, 1 million people on the streets, that takes a lot of work, and it takes money to do that. So we need corporate sponsors. The point is, are you going to put your sponsors ahead of the community, or your community ahead of the sponsors?
So my final question is, I mentioned earlier that you donated all your archives to the Smithsonian. What do you think we as individuals should do to help preserve our time now, which will become the history for future LGBT generations? What should we do as individuals?
Well, I think we first have to appreciate and understand that we do have a history, and I don't think most of our community realizes that. I remember in 1969 marching, Gay Liberation Front marched in a protest to free Angela Davis, which mostly was a Black Power march.
Yes.
And I remember hearing the people around me, the African Americans around me, talking about people in our community have to start appreciating Black history. Well, in 1969, the Black community didn't appreciate their own history. Today, they do. And I think we have to start doing the same thing and trying to make our younger generation appreciate our history. I don't think, I started appreciating our history about around the 25th anniversary of Stonewall, when we had a reunion, our first reunion in New York, and Barbara Giddings and her lover Kayla Husen were sitting on a bench. They were holding stuffed animals. And I walked over to Barbara and I said, "Barbara, what are you doing?" And she says, "We're dinosaurs now." They were holding stuffed dinosaurs. So I've been ever since, now 25 years, trying to work on preserving gay history. Even I was shocked at what that means. So I got a call from the Smithsonian, and they said, "Can we come up and see you?" And so 3 people came to Philadelphia, where I live, sitting around my dining room table, and they're trying to sell me on donating all my personal papers and artifacts over the last 50 years to Smithsonian. And they went on this long talk. And finally, I just looked at them. I said, "Do you realize you're the Smithsonian? Does anyone turn you down?" So that's how that happens. But there are archives in practically every major city, and people who have history should start donating those things. They'll be utilized. I know that one incorporated in Los Angeles and Stonewall Museum in Fort Lauderdale are working with the Smithsonian. There's a connection to 3 of them, and they're going to be able to share all those artifacts and papers now. And eventually, a lot of that will be online. And I think it's very helpful.
Very exciting too. Well, we look forward to sharing your past in the future, which in 2 days' time here in Provincetown. Have a safe journey, and thank you for talking to us today.
Hey, and help me find some restaurants I can go to dinner at.
Bye.
Have a good day.